Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. For those of you who watch our videos, we appreciate your time. In this episode, I am going to dive into the reason. I'm titling this video, How Europe is Attempting to Destroy the Continent of Africa's Economy. I will be giving you some analytical perspective in this video. Why Africa should pay attention on what's happening in Brussels and also in Washington. Africans should not focus on speeches. Speeches don't work anymore. Here on this channel, for those of you who've been following us, we focus on detailed content and what is shaping Africa's life across its borders, not speeches. A number of you come to our channel to find out that you are looking for breaking news. Sorry, if you're looking for breaking news, go and watch CNN and BBC. Here we talk about specifics, what's shaping Africa's life, the future of its people, and how Africa's geopolitical partners are trying to put Africa in where it is or where it should be. It's kind of like a box that was created for the continent. But as someone who's been in the geopolitical sector for quite some time, I think that we are creating videos that will open the eyes of a lot of African decision-making processes. For this video today, I'm going to be looking at how Europe is engaging Africa but pulling the string from behind. In this particular episode, I'm going to be looking at the global gateway and how Europe perceived Africa from a different perspective, looking at this particular investment. I will also look at how Europe is about to counter China based on what they are putting forward and the number of gatekeepers approach that Europe is using. More importantly, the back to business, why Europe was just trying to wake up from sleep, and more importantly, the green paradox that the European Union is using to pull the continent of Africa. And Africans have to pay attention on what's going on. And let me just kick this video first with this particular opening based on my own assessment before I jump into something very important about this particular episode. The European Union has placed huge bets on an investment program in Africa, yet inherent flaws in its technocratic approach and a lingering paternalism threatens the whole scheme. If you look at Europe in particular, the European Union officials are regularly traveling to Africa with new development programs and offers of equal partnerships and green development according to their own perspective, while admitting they have self-serving interest to pursue with their neighbors to the south. The world is not what it used to be, and Europe hasn't understood that so far. However, one element of its new geopolitical configuration is the fierce competition for Africa. Above all, this contest pits Europe against China, and thought it involves other global powers like the United States of America, Russia, and also India, alongside with regional players such as Turkey and also Brazil. The question is whether Europe, as Africa's primary historical partner and former colonizer, has any prospect of winning this confrontation. There is room for doubt, as we all see, for all its claim of a new paradigm. What the European Union has to offer can still be seen as a patronizing or even worse if you consider other aspects. A number of European policy towards Africa have been called to question over the years, and why the continent itself is looking at Europe from a different perspective. One very important thing that drives my focus, and I'm looking at creating such a video, is about the patronizing habit that Europe has put forward over the years. While European Union leaders keep talking about partnership of equals, their stated intention of including local partners in projects is inherently patronizing. Africans have grown increasingly resentful of the paternalism of aid and also institutionalizing design produced by so-called experts in Washington or in Brussels. Both issues concern the age-old knowledge problem. No one mentions skewed incentive of outsiders when they bypass local stakeholders. Replying to French President Emmanuel Macron, if I take you back to a particular press conference that was held between the French President Emmanuel Macron and the Ghanaian President Mr. Akufo-Nana-Addo, where he actually said this: we can no longer continue to make policy for ourselves, in our country, in our region, in our continent, on the basis of whatever support that Western world or France or the European Union can give us. It has not worked and it will not work at all based on its own perspective. And this is not only what that particular president said. In a similar context, President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, in 2023 clearly stated that it is precisely this that needs to change in our relations with France in particular and with the West and Europe in general. The president said, "Look at us differently by respecting us, by considering us as real partners, and not always with a paternalistic perspective of always thinking you know what we need." That particular approach doesn't sit well in the continent of Africa. Africa badly needs economic freedom to unleash its massive entrepreneurial potential. It is just quite uncertain whether the European Union development strategy, conceived in a typical technocratic fashion, focuses on this need, despite its good intention in other ways. Something that strikes me with regards to how Europe is engaging the continent of Africa. The green paradox is a disaster based on what the African people should be looking at in this particular case. Coupled with the Green Deal, Europe is spreading the gospel of sustainability as a strategy for a doing well by doing good. The feat is not so neat, however, as many sees the imposition of a green agenda on African development as a serious obstacle to industrialization-based growth for the continent. The new European Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, known as the CBDM, a green carbon tax on import launched in October 2023, might create adverse effects for African industrialized export to the European Union, making them less competitive through complicated and costly red tapes. If you look at geopolitics in place, last December, the president of the African Development Bank estimated that the CBDM, like I pointed out, could end up costing African government as much as $25 billion per year. That seemed a heavy price to pay for a latecomer to the development race, especially since Africa only contributes 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions and was among the first regions to feel negative climate change effect. The measure seems even more unfair because fossil fuel are one of Africa's main export to Europe. Leaving the latter opens to criticism for double standard. Europe's hypocrisy may become even more glaring if its scramble for gas intensifies due to the cutoff of Russia with regards to supplies. What really drives me nuts with regards to how I see this particular issue with regards to regulated issues. On the trade front, despite the European Union Economic Partnership Agreement and the lifting of tariffs, many African businesses in the farm sector are hampered by a non-tariff protectionism and European subsidies. This hidden protectionism serves to discredit the customary win-win narrative issuing from Brussels. It also bolsters claim that Europe is attempting to restore colonial or post-colonial economic relations with Africa, which has served many African politicians as a pretext for turning to competing powers like Russia or China. However, this narrative is actually true. A lot of African farmers are struggling and Europe increasingly subsidizes its own farmers, and you talk about win-win situation. That I don't see if you put things in a square peg in a square hole. Recent European attempts at regulating supply chains have also had some paradoxical effect. The Corporate Due Diligence Directive adopted by European Parliament in April indeed requires big European Union and non-European Union companies to exercise due diligence along their supply chains. Its likely effect will be to make supply chain sourcing and direct investment much more costly in most African or many African states where enforcement of human rights and also environmental protection is weak. For all its good intention, the measure's unintended consequences will be to encourage many companies that sells into the European Union to divest from Africa, thereby affecting the African economies. This notion that Europe thinks it can proceed with policies that are, on one hand, talk about development and engagement on an equal basis, and on the other hand, goes about creating access to things which will engage Africa from a not a win-win perspective. One very important thing is that Europe, all of these strategies that they are trying to focus on is to combat China. For just completely, that's just the reason. From a geopolitical perspective, the massive investment program is a clear counter to China's strategic encroachment through the Belt and Road Initiative, which Africans have benefited enormously, from Kenya to a number of other African countries, which has shown that Africa works to an extent. The BRI potential $900 billion in long-term investment has lured many African countries into the Chinese orbit. Trying to reserve this trend poses a serious challenge. At the United Nations, for example, a difficulty of promoting Western values and initiatives is shown by the stinging 2022 defeat of the United Nations Human Rights Council motion on Chinese repression of the Uyghurs. For example, the United Nations October 2022 resolution to condemn Russia's war in Ukraine, which passed the General Assembly by a 143-5 votes, failed to win support from most African states, which either abstained or were absent. The European Union has taken pains to distinguish its investment from China. First, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has been blunt about not using European Union funds to leverage Chinese capital, saying it makes no sense for European Union to build a road between a Chinese-owned copper mine and Chinese-owned port. Secondly, the European Union insists on assessing the monitoring and environmental and human rights impact of its project. If you look at different aspects, the European Union to an extent is creating policies that are meant to hold the African continent in one place and preaching a win-win situation, which I believe that it's not a policy that the continent of Africa needs. Africa should pay attention on what is going on in Brussels and also in Washington, because a number of African governments don't really pay attention to what's happening beyond their borders. This geopolitical fight is not about Russia and China being the continent, but the policies that are being crafted in Brussels that are in many cases will affect your economies and also put you in the same position that you've been over the years. This video was meant for the continent of Africa to pay attention on what's going on beyond its borders. The African Union should also have an observation status into the European Union and also in the United States of America. Let us know what you think with regards to these hidden policies that Europe is placing and why Africans should react as soon as possible to make sure that they also can pull the strings from a number of areas. Africa should use its leverage and stand up to Europe from a strategic point of view and let Europe know that it's not going to be business as usual. If the African governments do not work in hand to also engage Europe from a different perspective, then they're going to be losing the fight. The geopolitical war so far is in the policy area, not in the open media. We want to thank you. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.